Alright everybody, let's talk about what happened this past Friday on SmackDown, with the Bloodline officially being over and the Bloodline Civil War being upon us. But before that, let's circle back to the week before, because we hadn't touched on that during this video series yet. 2 weeks ago on SmackDown, Jey Uso challenged Austin Theory for the United States Championship, to try to bring a mid-card championship to the Bloodline, which is something that has eluded them since Solo Sikoa lost his NXT North American Championship on NXT. It was going to be Jey Uso versus the longtime reigning defending United States Champion in A-Town Down Austin Theory. And it looked as if Jey Uso was going to be the man to win the United States Championship and bring that title over to the Bloodline. However, as we know with this storyline, that was not the case. After an interference from NXT Tag Team and Pretty Deadly, who made their main roster debut not too long ago, on behalf of Austin Theory, the United States Champion, Jimmy Uso would come down to try to help Jey Uso and even up the numbers game against Pretty Deadly. However, all in this time, Solo Sikoa would come down on behalf of Roman Reigns, the WWE Undisputed Universal Champion and the Tribal Chief, and try to take out Jimmy Uso in order to keep Jey in the Bloodline and keep Jimmy away from him. All during this time, Solo Sikoa would line up for a Samoan spike on Jimmy Uso, but Jey would jump in and stop Solo. And during this hesitation, Jimmy Uso would line up for a super kick we believed was intended for Solo Sikoa, but Solo would move out of the way and Jey Uso would be hit in the chin by his brother and Jimmy Uso and taken out. And after this, the United States Champion in Austin Theory was able to crawl into the cover and retain his United States Championship, further cementing the cracks in the foundation of the Bloodline. And heading into this past Friday's SmackDown, where Jey Uso would make his decision whether he was going to stay in the Bloodline or leave and align with Jimmy, we finally got all of our answers. During the entire show, it was about Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns trying to keep Jimmy away from Jey, trying to keep him away from the man that they wanted to become the Tribal Chief. The heir to the throne, according to Roman and Heyman, was going to be Jey Uso. They believed him to be better than Jimmy. They believed that Jimmy was only holding down what Jey Uso could truly become, which was the heir to the throne and the new Tribal Chief once Roman Reigns stepped down as the head of the table and the WWE Undisputed Universal Champion, sporting his new belt, by the way. And does this really come as a surprise to you? Because the first man who was held down, made to become a servant and manipulated by the Universal Champion in Roman Reigns, was Jey Uso, and for the most part it was at the expense of his brother and Jimmy, who he said I quit for in order to save him from the clutches of Roman Reigns' guillotine back at Hell in a Cell. When it came down to the segment, it was one of the most emotional segments throughout the entire storyline, but I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody, since this is, in fact, the best storyline the WWE has done in the past decade. However, prior to the decision being made, Jey Uso ran into a familiar face backstage, and a former brother and the former honorary Uso in Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn was sitting backstage and stood up looking at Jey's face as if he already knew what the decision was going to be. He smiled and nodded at Jey Uso, and Jey Uso looked on. Although he didn't have a happy expression on his face, he knew what needed to be done. When the segment occurred, Jimmy Uso was called down to the ring by Roman Reigns, saying that he could speak for himself and he could tell Jey exactly what Roman and everybody else in the Bloodline thought all along, that Jimmy didn't want Jey to succeed. Jimmy didn't want Jey to be the heir to the throne. He did not want him to be the Tribal Chief in the wings. He wanted to hold him down just like everybody else had been holding Jimmy back, because he felt as if he was the best out of the Bloodline. After Jimmy came down to the ring, Roman and Jey looked at each other, and Jey asked Jimmy if that was true. If it was Jimmy not wanting Jey to succeed, if he was holding him back on purpose because he didn't want Jey to be more of a successor in his WWE career and more of a successor in the Bloodline than Jimmy. And Jimmy looked at Jey with disappointment while keeping his head down and looking down in disapproval, saying that it was true. And Jey couldn't help it. You could see the manipulation, the emotion, the drama, the sadness, the hurt, all coming through the face and pouring out of the pores of Jey Uso. And they continued to speak, and Jey said to Jimmy that he was always the most likely to succeed. Jimmy was prom prince, he was prom king, most likely to succeed, the MVP, the best player on the team. And Jay was always looked down on, or in his case, Joshua was always looked down on as not being as good as his brother. And the segment continued and continued and continued until Jay kicked Jimmy out of the Bloodline and said that it was Roman who got him to the main event. It was Roman who got him to main event SmackDown, to main event pay-per-views, to main event WrestleMania, to get him to be main event Jay Uso. It was all because of Roman and not because of Jimmy. And when Jimmy was away hurt, it was Jay who held down the fort for the Bloodline. It was Jay who held down the fort for the Usos, and it was Jay who kept everything together for the family. So he said, you know what, Jimmy, you're out. And he looked at Jay, or Jay looked at Jimmy and walked forward and looked down. But for a brief second, he hesitated as Roman Reigns sat behind them with the tyrannical reign that he's been encompassing, with the tyrannical, manipulative leader that he's been, with a giant smile and smirk on his face. But Jay didn't say what Roman thought. Jay said, and I'm out too. And bang! He hit Roman Reigns right in the face with a super kick. And then Solo Sikoa was taken out with a super kick as well. And Jimmy and Jay looked at Roman and hit a double super kick to take him out. And just like that, the Bloodline is officially over. The story's been years in the making, ever since Jay Uso became the servant of Roman Reigns following the Clash of the Champions. Ever since Jay Uso was forced to say I quit in order to save his brother, who was locked in the clutches of the guillotine of Roman Reigns inside the Hell in a Cell I Quit match. He was always so close to beating Roman but never could get it done. And now finally Jay and Jimmy and Jay, the Usos are free from the grasp of the Thanos-like approach of Roman Reigns. And it looks as if at Money in the Bank in July in London, England, we're going to get the Bloodline Civil War that we've all been waiting for. The Usos and Jimmy and Jay versus Solo Sikoa and Roman Reigns in the first battle of a Bloodline Civil War. Now, will it end there? I highly doubt it. Will Solo Sikoa finally start to see Roman for who he is and break away from Reigns, leaving him all alone with his mouthpiece? Or in Reigns' words, his wise man in Paul Heyman. This story has been the best story the WWE has done in over a decade, like we touched on earlier in the video and like we've touched on throughout the series. There's so many layers that still need to be peeled back, even though the Bloodline is virtually over. And we move one step closer to that as Reigns and Sikoa take on Jimmy and Jay at Money in the Bank.